the antithesis of patience. Look at verse 9. Do not complain, brethren, against one another, so that you yourselves may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. What is the antithesis of patience? What is the opposite of patience? Complaining. Complaining. He says, do not complain, brethren. Boy, we're good at that, aren't we? We are complainers. If there's one observation we can make about the human race, and there's so many we could make, but certainly one of those observations would be we are complainers. Do not complain, brethren. The word complain translates the Greek verb stenazo, and it means to groan, to sigh, to express anger or grief. Could even be translated as murmur or grumble. It comes from a word that means compressed or constricted. It carries the simple idea of groaning under pressure. It's a typical response to suffering. Groaning. And by the way, the word does not necessarily refer to an act of sin. It is not inherently sinful to groan. Let me prove that to you. Jesus groaned, and He never sinned, did He? And therefore groaning can't be inherently sinful. In Mark 7:34, it says that Jesus looked up to heaven with a deep sigh. Same Greek word there. That was in the context of Him healing a deaf man. Jesus looked up to heaven and He groaned. He groaned. In Romans 8:23, Paul says, we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. We legitimately groan in this world as we await the resurrection and our glorification and the redemption of our body. We legitimately groan in a fallen world. That's just reality. So the word is not always used to refer to an act of sin. The problem is not groaning. Listen, the problem is groaning against one another. He says, do not complain, brethren, against one another. So the problem is not when we legitimately groan in a fallen world in the midst of suffering. The problem is when our groaning is directed at others. When we take our suffering out on others. When our groaning becomes complaining and verbal abuse against those around us. And again, this is the opposite of patience. I told you that the word for patience, makroth umeo, it has the idea of long suffering or long temper. Someone who is not quick to explode in the midst of his pain. The opposite of that is someone who is quick to explode. Someone who does get angry. Someone who does retaliate. Who does seek his own revenge through verbal abuse and verbal attack. And again, when we suffer, that is our natural response, isn't it? That's what we naturally do. We take it out on those around us. When we are miserable, we seek to make those around us miserable as well, don't we? You think of the father who comes home from a long day of work and he's tired and grumpy and his day didn't turn out the way he would have liked and he ends up being mean to his family. He's grumpy to his family. That's just the epitome of how we are by nature. We take our suffering out on others, even if they had nothing to do with it. We get agitated about our circumstances, so we complain against others. We gripe at others. We verbally abuse others. But that is sinful. That is evil. That is the opposite of patience. And that we must not do. Do not complain. Again, this is contrary to the law of love. The law of love. Leviticus 19:18 says, you shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Don't take vengeance. Don't retaliate. Don't grumble against others. Don't complain against others. Instead, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. In Galatians 5:14, Paul says, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, 'You shall love your neighbor as yourself.' But," he adds in verse 15, "if you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another." That often happens, especially in the context of the local church or even within the home and within the family, within relationships. We devour one another with our words. That is the opposite of patience. That is the opposite of love. We must not do that. We must fulfill the law of Christ and love our neighbor as ourselves. James goes on to tell us why we shouldn't complain against one another. He says, do not complain, brethren, against one another. Why? So that you yourselves may not be judged. That's a pretty good reason not to complain, isn't it? So that you yourself may not be judged. If you remember back in chapter 4, verse 11, James said, "Do not speak against one another." And he equated speaking against one another with judging one another. It's speaking down to, demeaning, condemning, abusing others with your words, as if you are their judge, as if you possess some sort of authority over them. James is saying, don't complain against one another, because as we've learned, it's a form of judging. And there's only one lawgiver and judge, and you aren't him. Only one. He is the one who is able to save and to destroy. He is the one who will judge all men, including you. And He is soon to come and render judgment. That's what James emphasizes at the end of verse 9. It says, "Behold, the judge is standing right at the door." That is another reference to the Lord's return. In fact, it's the third such reference in this text. Clearly, that is a major emphasis in the passage. And again, James emphasizes the imminence of the Lord's return. He's standing right at the door, as if at any moment He's going to burst through the door into the courtroom and take His seat on the judgment seat to render judgment. Even you will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Even you, believer, will give an account for your life. So don't grumble. Don't complain against one another. Don't judge one another. For if you do, you will be judged. As Jesus said back in Matthew 7, verses 1 through 2, this is probably our culture's favorite verse. "Do not judge, that you be not judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and your standard of measure will be measured to you." The way you judge other people, God's going to turn that back around on your own head. If you judge others unrighteously, unmercifully, unfairly, that's going to come back on you. God's going to use your own standard against you. Back in chapter 2, verse 13, James said, "Judgment will be merciless to one who has shown no mercy." If your miserable circumstances cause you to become overly critical of others without mercy, God will judge you without mercy. Again, as Jesus says in Matthew 12:37, "By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." Is He teaching justification by works? No. He's teaching that the evidence that you are justified is your words. Your words, your life, your speech, the way you talk to other people. That either testifies to the validity of your faith or it testifies against your faith. If we are merciless to others, God will be merciless to us. If we condemn others, God will condemn us. Again, we will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And so in the words of 2 Corinthians 4:5, "Therefore, do not go on passing judgment before the time, but wait until the Lord comes, who will both bring to light the things hidden in the darkness and disclose the motives of men's hearts." Stop complaining. Stop groaning. Stop judging. Let the Lord judge. You wait patiently on